the iron-gray clouds churned over Jincheng City, as if someone had splattered a whole bottle of industrial waste across the sky. Clara stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of the top-floor conference room at Yinghua Tower, watching the city rot under the sunset. The turquoise bracelet her best friend gave her suddenly snapped off her wrist, beads scattering all over the floor, as if mocking her foolishness in this life. That was one day before her 27th birthday. She remembered perfectly, because in her past life, today was where all the nightmares began, where the project was stolen, trust was trampled on, and Julian's true face began peeling away from this day. 4 months after One Piece. In the months that day. In the months that followed, she watched all her hard work be branded with Ethan's name, saw Julian bask in glory on the awards stage, while she was pushed to the edge in the industry with nowhere to go. On that last rainy night, counting cracks on the ceiling in a rented room, her bank balance and her bank card reduced to 3 digits, she felt like nothing in her life would ever get better. Now, she returned to this day. Behind her, Julian's voice sweet as coffee loaded with sugar. Clara, this project just won't work, I've already reviewed it for you 3 times, no need to turn back to know. He was gazing at her with those deep eyes, his left index finger unconsciously rubbing the edge of the teacup, his tell every time he lied. The documents on the conference table gave off the fresh scent of ink. Clara flipped open her project plan open. The cover was a geometric design she had spent 3 sleepless nights perfecting, every line precise to the pixel. But when she turned to the 3rd page, she found a stranger's name, Ethan. Who is Ethan? She turned around, her voice so calm that even she found it surprising. Julian approached with a teacup in hand, several Longjing tea leaves floating in the pale celadone cup. It was his favorite brand. Oh, the new intern. A kid with ideas. I noticed his proposal was quite similar to yours, so I thought I'd have him assist you in moving this forward. He paused, as if searching for the right words. Clara, I know you're highly capable, but sometimes you need to learn to work with the younger ones. Clara stared at the faint pink lipstick stain on his collar, remembering the same moment from her past life. Back then, she had been stunned at first, then smiled and agreed it was a thoughtful arrangement. When Julian casually brought up Ethan's difficult circumstances, she had even voluntarily ceded the project credit to this promising junior. Only later did she discover that the entire plan had been orchestrated by Julian from the very beginning. Now, Clara closed the folder and gently pushed it back to the center of the desk. Julian, she stared directly into his eyes, catching the flicker of impatience that flashed across his gaze. This project has taken me 3 months. The core algorithm and data structure were done entirely by myself. Since Ethan has ideas, let him handle a submodule on independent submodule alone. I have other things to attend anyway. Julian's teacup wobbled, a few drops of splashed onto the desk. Clara, what do you mean by that? Didn't you always say you wanted to mentor newcomers? I said mentor newcomers, not let them take the fruits of labor. Clara smiled, and from her bag. Oh, by the way, about the dinner you had with Ethan at Hyatt last Wednesday night, I happen to have a friend who's the manager there. You two had a good time, talking for over 3 hours, and even mentioned a 4-6 split? Julian's face changed color. His left hand began stroking to caress the teacup again, this time with much greater force, his knuckles turning white. You investigated me? Was there any need to investigate? Clara stood up, her skirt brushing against the back of the chair. Julian, we've known each other for 5 years, been together for 3. Every time you lie, you touch your cup. Every time you're guilty, you raise an why time you're feeling, you raise an eyebrow. Every time you're plotting something against someone, you smile first. Did you think I wouldn't notice? She walked to the door and looked back at him, back over her shoulder. The setting sun slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting Julian's shadow long and thin and long, like a thread about to snap that was about to break. I'll continue working on the project, but the authorship credit belongs to me. As for Ethan, she paused, let him write an independent technical proposal for me to review. He can't just swoop in and take over the project without knowing anything, can he? As the elevator door slid shut, Clara heard the sound of a teacup shattering from inside the meeting room. She leaned against the cold elevator wall, looking up at the jumping floor numbers, her palms drenched in sweat. 3 days ago, she had woken up on the rooftop of this very building, her turquoise bracelet, Julian's birthday gift to her, scattered all over the ground. In her previous life, she had worn it for 3 full years, only to realize in the end that the final it was fake beads lay on the cement floor like a heap of crushed lies. She crouched down to pick them up one by one, pocketing one of them. Last time, she hadn't taken anything with her. This time, she intended this bead to become a. As she stepped out of Yinghua Tower, her phone buzzed. It was Ivy, a former colleague who had lent her 5,000 yuan during her lowest point in her previous life, only to be later accused by Julian of leaking company secrets. By Clara, I found out about that Ethan, the one you asked me to look into last time. Ivy's voice was very low. He didn't graduate from Jincheng University. Julian bought him a fake degree. And he's related to Julian by blood, cousins. His mother is Julian's aunt. Clara held her phone, watching the endless stream of vehicles on the street. The evening rush hour in Jincheng had begun, and neon lights flickered on one by one, like pairs of eyes opening. Ivy, thank you, she said. I'll take you out for a meal another day. Also, I'm putting together my own project team, so think about coming and help me. The salary and position will both better than what you have now. The line was silent for 2 seconds, then Ivy laughed and said, Good, I've been waiting to hear you say that for a long time. After hanging up, Clara saved Ethan's fake educational credentials into an encrypted folder. The USB drive she carried with her contained the true copies of all core algorithm codes, but she had refactored a version of this code, replacing all key parameters with pseudo data. The actual core logic was stored on her local machine, in a high-strength encrypted virtual machine isolated from the company intranet, protected by a 6-character password known only to herself. She wrote in her memo, Evidence 1 authorship right dispute. Evidence 2, Ethan Thempany. Evidence night meeting at the Grand Hyatt. Goal within 3 weeks, make Julian's project proposal disappear entirely from the company's systems. Monday morning, when Clara arrived at the office, she found someone had been placed in the cubicle adjacent to her own. Ethan sat there, wearing a suit that was clearly one size too large, his tie crooked, scratching his head in front of a computer screen, scratching his head in confusion. As she approached, he immediately stood up, revealing a nervous smile. Senior Clara, Julian sent me to learn from you. Clara paused for a beat as she put down her bag. In her previous life, this intern had sat beside her on the very first day, looking at her with the same innocent expression, and within a month had learned the entire blueprint of her project. There's no need to call me senior, she said as she pulled out a chair and sat down. Just call me Clara. Did Julian mention the project to you? Ethan nodded. He did. He said I'm supposed to assist you with the technical proposal. All right then, Clara said, pulling a stack of printed documents from her drawer. This is the project architecture documentation I've put together. Take a look first, and if there's anything you don't understand, just ask. As Ethan took the documents, Clara noticed black ink under the nails of his nails. He must have stayed up late printing something last night. In her past life, she had handed him everything without hesitation, including the core algorithm package. But this time, the architecture documents she gave him had all the key parameters replaced dummy data. The actual logic was stored on her local virtual machine, completely from the company's internal network. At 10 in the morning, Julian paused by Clara's desk after finishing their regular meeting. Clara, there's a cross-department review meeting this afternoon. Get prepared and present the current progress of the project. His tone was gentle, but Clara caught the subtext. He wanted Ethan to showcase his abilities at the meeting, catching her off guard. In her last life, it had been just the same. At that review meeting, Ethan had accidentally proposed a key improvement plan that won senior management's favor. All right, Clara smiled. Perfect timing. I was hoping to let everyone see what Ethan has learned in the past couple of days. Julian's expression stiffened for a moment, but he quickly regained composure. Of course. That would be wonderful. At lunchtime, Clara pulled Ivy to the noodle shop downstairs. Ivy, while pouring vinegar into her bowl, lowered her voice and said, "Guess what I heard in the break room today? Julian told Ethan to let you speak more at the meeting so Ethan wouldn't feel too nervous." Clara picked up a strand of noodles with her chopsticks. "So he wants me to be the lead and Ethan to be the supporting role?" "That's not all." Ivy put down the vinegar bottle of vinegar. "He also told people that you've been struggling lately, probably under too much stress, much pressure, and asked everyone to be more understanding. Clara, he's been digging you into a trap. When present your best report, they'll think you're just forcing yourself through, while Ethan says a few nice words, he becomes the savior who jumped in to help." Clara laughed. In her previous life, when she heard these rumors, she was so furious that she cried in the restroom for half an hour. Then, during the afternoon presentation, she was indeed so nervous that she became incoherent rambled. But this time, she finished her presentation PPT 3 days in advance, hiding 3 logical traps that only she knew about. Anyone who tried to supplement her plan during the meeting would inevitably fall right into them. At 2:30 p.m., the review meeting started on time. The conference room was full of people, project directors, technical leads, product managers, dozens of eyes fixed on the projection screen. Clara stood at the front, and when the PPT reached the 3rd page, she deliberately paused, moving the cursor to a seemingly ordinary interface definition. "The design of this module, I'd like to hear everyone's thoughts," she said. Ethan raised his hand, just as expected. He was still smiling as he stood up, a smile exactly like in his previous life, carrying that eager finally my turn's finally here look. "Clara, I think we can optimize this part," he said, walking over his shoulder, walking up to the projection screen and picking up the laser pointer to highlight the interface. "If we tweak the data structure and the transmission protocol, the efficiency can be improved by at least 30%. The meeting room fell silent for 2 seconds. The technical lead frowned. EAD frowned. "Ethan, your proposal sounds good, but as for its feasibility..." "I've already verified the feasibility," Ethan said, pulling a USB drive from his bag. I made a demo last night. Everyone can take a look." Clara stood nearby, watching Ethan plug his USB drive into the computer. She noticed Julian subtly clench his fist under the table, a habit of his when his scheme had succeeded. Then Ethan's presentation began. He pulled up a seemingly sophisticated architecture diagram, annotated with various optimization parameters. The proposal did appear brilliant, nearly masterful, almost flawlessly mimicking Clara's design approach, each logical connection seamlessly copied. But on the third page, he invoked the key parameter that Clara had replaced with false data. The true core algorithm relied on a complex recursive structure for that parameter, but in the false data version Ethan had obtained, the structure had been simplified into a linear sequence. When he applied this optimization plan, the system crashed, the screen flooded with red error messages, all Stack Overflow and concurrent modification exception. The technical lead engineer's face immediately darkened instantly. "Ethan, there must be something wrong with your data for this plan. The concurrency logic doesn't hold at all, and parameter structure you're calling is clearly incorrect." Ethan immediately broke into a sweat. He looked toward Julian for help, but Julian was busy scrolling his phone pretending not notice. Clara chose right moment to speak. "Actually, I added note at end slide explaining that interface remains its original design to accommodate future extension compatibility." She pressed remote control and screen displayed supplementary page she had prepared showing correct result based real parameters. Ethan probably wanted too hard stand out didn't notice backup PPT, version document he got might incomplete, so some critical parameters could have been missed. Quiet laughter rippled through room. Face crimson nearly dripping blood, Ethan retreated corner without saying word. The lead engineer gave Clara a thoughtful glance as if realizing something but didn't call on it. After the meeting, as Clara was packing her things, Julian walked over with a forced smile that seemed a bit strained. Clara, you did a great job today. Did I? Clara put her computer into her bag. By the other day, Julian, when I looked up Ethan's educational background, I found his name wasn't in the list of graduates from Jincheng University. What do you make of that? Julian's smile froze completely. But he quickly steadied his emotions, lowered his voice, and said, Clara, why are you digging into this? Ethan is a promising talent. Even if there's a problem with his educational background, it's a flaw in the recruitment process, not his fault. Doing this only makes you seem petty. Clara glanced at without a word, hugging her laptop as she walked out of the conference room. She had expected Julian to panic on the spot, but she had underestimated his ability to handle crises. He had chosen to label the fake diploma as a recruitment process error, shift the focus. What surprised her even more was that early the next morning, she received a notice of a meeting from the compliance department. Julian had beaten her to it. He reported to the company about Ethan's questionable academic credentials first, but he did so doing in the guise of proactively discovering a team flaw in the team, stating that he had already given Ethan a severe reprimand, posing himself as a responsible leader. The compliance meeting lasted 40 minutes, during which Clara cooperatively provided the evidence Ivy had uncovered. However, because of his proactive report, Julian gained the upper hand. Senior management temporarily decided to keep Ethan on probation while also criticizing the hiring department's negligence. Far from suffering any damage, Julian instead scored points with management for his superiors, earning well-managed reputation. Clara returned to her desk and set her computer down hard. She had underestimated him. This man was even more cunning than she had seen in her previous life. He knew when to retreat, when to advance, and when to strike first to turn somebody else's cards into his own leverage. She opened the encrypted folder and added a line to her memo, countermove, reporting first, shifting the FO. This one is even tougher than. But she also realized that Julian's victory this time was actually his greatest flaw, because in order to protect Ethan, he had admitted to the compliance department that there were loopholes existed in the recruitment process. This meant that if more issues with Ethan surfaced later, Julian's voluntary report would turn into covering up and shielding, with entirely different legal implications. She needed more solid evidence. That evening, back in her apartment, she pulled out the materials Ivy had sent her on her phone and went over them again. In her previous life, Julian's ultimate secret to success, besides stealing her project, was that he had cultivated several key contacts in the industry, people who later provided him with capital and channels when he started his own business. If she moved too early now and alerted him, he could easily slip away with all these resources and retreat unscathed to start over elsewhere. She needed to strike once and for all at the most opportune moment. The following week, Clara lay low. She pushed the project forward as usual, maintaining a surface-level politeness with Ethan, even proactively assigning him a few trivial tasks. Julian thought she had backed down and started casually bringing up in the department again. Some old-timers just can't stand to see newcomers get ahead. But over those 7 days, Clara did 3 things. First, she took screenshots of all the traces of Ethan's code tampering, the erroneous parameters he had copied from her fake data scheme, and archived them, forming a complete technical traceability chain. Second, through a friend in the industry, she obtained records of Julian's recent private meetings with several senior executives at Yinghua Tower. He was planning to jump ship and was already negotiating an equity package. Third, she spent 2 all-nighters reorganizing the project's complete technical documentation and submitted it to the technical committee for review. This version was based on the real core algorithm from her local virtual machine, with every line of code backed by her Git commit history from the past 3 months. On the day of the company's quarterly meeting, Clara stood on the stage of the 1,000-seat auditorium, laser pointer in hand, facing the company's top brass and colleagues. On the big screen, her project data flashed. The project that Julian and Ethan had coveted for an entire month was now nearly 80% complete, with all metrics far exceeding expectations. In the front row sat the CEO and several vice presidents. Julian sat in the 3rd row by the aisle, maintaining a standard smile, but Clara noticed his left hand kept rubbing the edge of his phone, He wasn't nervous, he was waiting for a signal. Clara knew he had prepared a backup plan for today as well. He had arranged for a technical consultant close to him to question the potential risks of Clara's project plan in terms of scalability during the Q&A session, aiming to muddy the waters. But what she wasn't here to defend today, she was here to launch a full-scale offensive. The core algorithm of this project is based on my past 3 years of work in distributed systems. Clara's tone was as steady as reading a weather forecast. But interestingly, just last month someone tried to replace it with a completely incompatible solution. She pressed the remote, and a comparison of 2 architectural diagrams appeared on the big screen. On the left was her own proposal, logically sound, rigorously layered. On the right was Ethan's version from the review meeting, chaotic arrows, conflicting interfaces, like a map that had been crumpled and then smoothed out again. Even more noteworthy is the fact that the parameters called in the right-hand scheme have never been disclosed by me in any official document. These parameters came from a personal test version, a document I've never submitted to the company's internal system. Clara paused, sweeping the audience. This means someone obtained my proprietary work files through illegitimate means. A buzz of murmurs filled the auditorium. Ethan's face was buried itself low, nearly disappearing into the back of his chair. Julian sat up straight, the first crack visible in his smile appearing. I don't know what this colleague was going through this colleague's mind, bringing a plan that hasn't even failed basic concurrency testing to challenge a system that has been running stably, Clara continued. But what I want to say is, there are no shortcuts in the tech world. The parameters you sneaked in won't run your data run the data for you, and the credentials you faked won't help you write algorithms. A graduate list that cannot be found in Jincheng University, yet a resume claiming to be an outstanding graduate of Jincheng University. I suggest everyone here stay curious about the floor, maintain a bit of curiosity about the rigor of our company's recruitment process's rigor as well. She pressed the remote, and a screen popped up with a comparison of Ethan's resume and Jincheng University's official graduate list popped up, the 2 pieces of information that completely mismatched. The 2 completely conflicted. The CEO leaned his head for a word with the VP of Technology next to him, who nodded grim expression. Who nodded sternly. Julian stood up to speak, but Clara was faster. She pulled something from her pocket and placed it gently on the podium, a green bead that glowed with a dull sheen under the stage lights. This is a bead that fell off a turquoise bracelet my ex-boyfriend gave me. Her voice was calm and clear. He told me it was natural, but it wasn't until I had it for 3 years that I found out it was fake. Some lies are just like this fake bead. Over time, the color fades, the surface cracks, and sooner or later, their true nature shows through. She looked at Julian and continued, thank you for teaching me for what you've taught me over the past 3 years, that some people are skilled at repackaging others' achievements as their own, and using a gentle tone to utter the most venomous lies. You've made me realize that kindness does not equal naivety, and trust does not mean blindness. When you rushed ahead and reported Ethan's degree issue to the compliance department, did you think you were quite clever, didn't you? But you forgot one thing, since you've admitted there are loopholes in the recruitment process, the fake data Ethan stole from me can no longer be explained away as normal collaborative exchange. Julian's face went completely white. He stood there, his lips moving several times, but nothing came out. The technical consultant behind him, who had originally prepared to launch an attack during the Q&A session, now lowered his head down pretending to scroll through his phone, completely motionless. He could see that Julian had already lost today's battle. Regarding this project, Clara continued, I have submitted the complete technical proposal to the Technology Committee for review. Every line of code has a traceable Git commit history. Additionally, regarding the suspicious behavior that occurred during the project's R&D phase, I have compiled a detailed timeline, along with screenshots of Ethan stealing fake data, records of Julian and Ethan meeting at the Grand Hyatt, and a video of their argument in the parking lot. All of these have been submitted to the compliance department. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across everyone in the room before finally resting on Julian. I suggest that if anyone here want to steal someone else's work, at least master the basics first. A trainee who can't even detect fake data should go back to brushing up on the fundamentals. As applause rang out, Clara saw Ivy clapping frantically in the 7th row, her eyes red. She saw her technical lead nodding approvingly. She watched as Ethan, clutching his laptop, fled the venue like a parasite whose disguise had peeled away. And Julian's final expression was a blankness she had never seen before, like someone who had grown so accustomed to cheating in the game suddenly realizing that the game they were playing never had a cheat mode at all. He opened his mouth, as if to say something, but in the end, said nothing. He turned and left the auditorium. After the meeting, the compliance department sent a company-wide email. An investigation into suspected misconduct during the project misconduct has been launched. Ethan has been fired immediately for falsifying his credentials and stealing company data. Julian, as his direct manager, has been suspended pending further investigation for covering up the violations and mishandling the situation. Clara shut down her computer and walked out of Yinghua Tower. It was a summer evening in Jincheng, the city of Jincheng. The sky was a gentle shade of gentle orange-pink. She stood at the curb waiting for the light and suddenly smelled gardenias on the air. The flower shop on the corner had just put out a fresh batch of blossoms. She walked over to buy a bunch of gardenias, then carried them into the subway station with her. On her phone, Julian had sent over a dozen messages, from "You must have misunderstood me" and "We need to talk" to "You'll regret this." His last message said, "Clara, please." She didn't bother replying. She blocked him directly. In his previous life, he sent her one final message on a rainy night, "We're not meant to be. I wish you happiness," and then blocked her on all platforms. This time, she would make him taste what it felt like to be blocked first. The Jincheng Tech Forum was held at the Intercontinental Hotel. It was one of the most important events in the industry, bringing together entrepreneurial elites, investors, and media reporters from all corners. Clara was one of the invited speakers, and she had just learned that she would be receiving the annual award at the forum, the highest recognition for her project. She arrived at the venue half an hour early and ran into Julian in the lounge. After being fired from Yinghua, he had managed to scrape by, relying on his past connections to land a position as a consultant at a small company. He had come to try and get a spot, he hoping to find new investors. But Clara knew that the investors he had contacted in recent days, upon hearing the party involved in Yinghua's data scandal, had declined to meet him. His path was narrowing. When he saw Clara, he froze for a moment, then smiled. The smile was exactly the same as the one he had given her on their first date 3 years ago, warm, genuine, and tinged with a hint of shyness. "Clara, long time no see." He walked over with a coffee cup. "Congratulations, I heard your project won the Best Innovation of the Year award." Clara looked at his face. She didn't hate him, she just felt that this person was like a book already read to tatters, with every page bearing the same word, lies. "Thank you," she said. "I heard you're now a consultant at Hingtong Technology?" Julian's smile stiffened for a moment. "Yeah, just a transitional phase. By the way, Clara, about what happened before, I've always wanted to apologize to you." "You don't need to apologize," Clara interrupted him. "You just need to admit that you did those things were done by you." Julian was silent for a few seconds, then said quietly, "It was Ethan's own proposal. I just didn't stop him." Clara laughed. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Your brother graduated from Tsinghua, and you've lived in his shadow since childhood. That's why you've made a habit of taking other people's things, because you think the world owes you. But what you steal can never truly become yours." Julian's back hit the wall, with no way to retreat. The coffee cup in his hand trembled violently, brown liquid splashing out, scalding his hand red. Clara stepped back, straightened her suit collar, and said, "I'll be going up on stage to accept an award later, then give a speech. Hope you have time to listen." She turned and left the lounge, this time without looking back. In the afternoon, Clara stood on the stage of the forum's main venue, the spotlight shining down on her as hundreds of industry professionals filled the seats. She accepted the crystal trophy from the host, and as she raised it high, a thunderous applause erupted from the audience. The topic I want to talk about today may not be directly related to technological innovation, she said into the microphone, but it determines how far a tech team can go. She didn't tell a story, instead, she presented a set of data, her project's user growth curve over the past 3 months, system stability metrics, and a quantitative evaluation of team collaboration efficiency. Then she turned to the last page, and a sentence popped up on the screen: "True innovation cannot be stolen." A 2-second silence fell over the audience, followed by even more thunderous applause. She saw investors in the front row nodding, saw her former superior giving her a thumbs up, and saw a few colleagues who had once doubted her were scribbling notes intently. She didn't name names, but everyone knew she's speaking about the turmoil that had rocked Yinghua building over the past month. And now, standing here, she let the data and awards speak for her, more powerful than any accusation could ever be. After the speech, Clara was packing up backstage when received a message from an unknown number. "Miss Clara, I'm Julian's brother. Thank you for your speech at the forum. He's always lived in shadow, and I as an older brother never noticed. I'll persuade him leave Jincheng for a while, start fresh." Clara stared at the screen for a long time, then typed a single word, "Okay." She set down her phone and fished the fake green pearl out of her bag. On the stage lights had made it seem dull, but now, under the warm glow of the break room, it radiated a strange, gentle luster. She placed the bead back into her bag and zipped it shut. Autumn had arrived in Jincheng. The ginkgo trees at the entrance of Yinghua Tower were beginning to turn yellow, a few fan-shaped leaves drifting down with each gust of wind. Clara sat by the window of her new office, the freshly signed equity agreement laid out before her. She had been promoted to deputy technical director, now led a team of 20. Project had successfully launched, user feedback exceeding expectations, and bonus she received last month was enough for a down payment on a small apartment. Ivy pushed the door open, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Vice Director, your Americano." Clara took the coffee, flinching slightly as the cup's heat stung her hand. "I told you, don't call me Vice Director." "Vice Director. Just use my name." All right, Clara," Ivy said. Ivy, sitting down across from her. Ivy was now a core development backbone in Clara's team, having jumped 2 ranks in seniority. "Oh, by the way, did you hear? Julian left Jincheng. He left the day before yesterday. I heard he went to Shenzhen. His brother found him a new job." Clara took a sip of her coffee, bitter taste spreading across her tongue. "That's good. A change of scenery, a change is good for him." "You don't hate him?" Ivy tilted her head to look at her. Clara gazed out the window, watching the ginkgo leaves spiral down in the wind. She took the turquoise bead from the drawer, held it in her palm for a moment, then pulled open the corner of the drawer and placed it inside, not to throw it away, but to put it away. "I did," she said. "But I don't anymore now. I just don't care. Whatever happens to him has nothing to do with me." During this time, she did many things she hadn't dared to in her previous life. She got back in touch base with her college advisor and applied for a part-time master's program. She took up oil painting on weekends, her first painting the plane tree outside her apartment, her parents a new refrigerator, and her mother rambled on the phone for half-hour about wasting money, but her voice was full of laughter. She also took Ivy out for that long-overdue meal, choosing the best Shanghainese restaurant in Jincheng. The 2 of a bottle of Huangjiu and talked until the restaurant closed. She even went to see a psychologist. After listening to her story, the doctor said one thing: "You did well. The fact that you didn't become like them is already the greatest victory." At 6 in the evening, Clara turned off her computer. Clara grabbed her bag and walked out of the office. Passing by her old desk, she paused for a moment. A new intern, a girl with a ponytailed girl, was sitting there, frowning at her screen. "Need any help?" "Clara, help," offer she. The intern looked up, her eyes lighting up. "Director Clara. I was about to ask you, I don't quite about the interface documentation." Stopped by her old desk for a moment. There sat a new intern, a girl with a ponytail, frowning at her screen. "Need some help?" Clara asked. The intern looked up, her eyes brightening. Director Clara. I've been meaning to ask you, Director Clara, this module's interface documentation for this module, I don't quite get it. Clara pulled up a chair and sat down, opening the document to begin her explanation. After she finished, the intern suddenly understood at once, so that's how it works. Thank you, Director Clara. You're welcome, Clara stood up. Feel free to ask me anything anytime if you don't understand. Remember, the most important thing in technology isn't about hoarding knowledge, but sharing it. But also remember, she paused, sharing doesn't mean giving away the right to be credited. If someone tells you to step aside, first figure out whether they want you to get out of the way or get out of your life. The intern blinked, nodding with a look of partial understanding. When Clara walked out of Yinghua Tower, the sky was already dark. The autumn temperature difference between day and night was stark in Jincheng City, and the evening breeze carried a chill. The gardenia shop at Jia Corner was still there, but it had swapped for golden chrysanthemums. As she reached the entrance of the subway station, her phone rang. It was a voice message from her mother, a voice message. Clara, that sweet and sour spare ribs you said you wanted to eat last time, I've come up with a new recipe. Want to come try it this weekend? Clara stood under the light at the subway entrance and replied with a voice message, Sure, Mom. She walked into the station, swiped her card through the turnstile, and waited on the platform to wait for the train. From deep within the tunnel depths came sound of approaching train, growing closer, like some sort of powerful heartbeat. The doors opened, she stepped inside and found a seat. The carriage wasn't crowded, across from her on a signboard it read, Meet a better version of yourself. Clara stared at those words and suddenly smiled. She thought of herself not long ago, standing on the rooftop of Yinghua Tower, her bracelets scattered across the ground, feeling as if her life had reached its end. And now, in the deep autumn of Jincheng, 27-year-old CL sat on the late-night subway, holding the plan for a new project in her bag, messages from her parents on her phone, and carrying in her heart a city being rebuilt in her heart. The subway started moving, and the billboards outside the window rushing backward. She closed her eyes, hearing the steady, rhythmic friction of the tracks. She thought, life is probably just like this. You break once, and then you learn how to piece yourself back together. Those fragments are still there, but you know they're only fragments now, not your entirety. And as for who you truly are, it never needed anyone else's definition. The train arrived at the station. Clara opened her eyes, stood up, and merged into the flow of people. The autumn in Jincheng was cool, yet the palms of her hands were warm.